The decline of a sophisticated human society known as societal collapse or civilizational collapse represents cultural identity loss, diminished socio-political structures, governmental fall, and increased violence. Factors contributing to societal decline include various disasters, wars, famine, economic breakdown, demographic changes, mass migrations, and possible interference or assimilation by competing civilizations in its aftermath. Affected societies may return to primitive states, assimilate into stronger societies, or vanish entirely. Most civilizations, regardless of their complexity or scale, have faced such declines, with some, like China, India, and Egypt, experiencing revival and transformation. Conversely, others, including the Western and Eastern Roman empires and the Maya and Easter Island civilizations, failed to recover generally. Societal collapse is a swift process, though not always sudden. Various disciplines such as anthropology, history, sociology, and others propose multiple factors for a civilization's collapse. They include environmental changes, resource depletion, unmanageable complexity, invasions, disease, social cohesion decay, rising inequality, creativity loss, and declining cognitive abilities. However, total cultural extinction is avoidable, with some societies rising as descendants of them. Previous ones, despite significant sophistication reduction, for instance. The long-standing influence of the Western Roman Empire survived long after its fall. Collapsology, the study of societal collapse, engages history, anthropology, sociology, and political science experts. Other emerging fields, including cryodynamics and complex systems, have also joined this critical study. Joseph Tainer, a noted figure in this field, views societal collapse as a political process in his influential work, The Collapse of Complex Societies, 1988. He highlights the rapid progression of inflicting substantial loss of socio-political structures using the Western Roman Empire as an example. There are differing opinions, particularly responding to Jared Diamond's Collapse, 2005, about societal cases of collapse. These accounts argue for an understanding through societal resilience and transformation or reorganization, particularly if collapse suggests the complete termination of political systems according to Shmuel Eisenstadt. This total end has not occurred throughout history. Luke Kemp, a social scientist, conducted a thorough analysis of various civilizations from 3000 BC to 600 NE. He characterized the civilizations with the presence of agriculture, multiple cities, regional military dominance, and continuous political structure according to his findings. The average lifespan of a civilization is approximately 340 years. Notably, the longest lasting were the Kushite Kingdom in Northeast Africa, the Aksumite Empire in Africa, and the Vedic civilization in South Asia, along with the Olmecs in Mesoamerica, each lasting for a millennia or more. In contrast, the shortest lived were the Nanda Empire in India and the Qing Dynasty in China, lasting for just decades. Samuel Arbesman, a complex systems specialist, pointed out that the end or collapse of empires rarely depends on the age of the empire. This theory is often compared to the Red Queen hypothesis in evolutionary biology that proposes, in a challenging environment, persistent threat of extinction looms. Modern discourses about societal collapse propose societal transformation for gaining resilience. This is due to the fact that human societies are intricate systems with interlocking factors leading to their decline, such as economic, environmental, demographic, social, cultural, amongst others, which may snowball enough to override any stability-maintaining mechanisms. Abrupt and unanticipated changes are among the harbingers of societal downfall in several instances. Natural catastrophes like tsunamis, earthquakes, pandemics, massive fires, or climatic alterations may trigger a societal collapse. Other elements like overpopulation, Malthusian catastrophe, or resource depletion might contribute to the collapse. However, studies reveal that these alone are not the sole causes. Notably, significant inequality and blatant corruption mixed with eroding loyalty to political institutions could lead to a revolution by the oppressed mass against the wealthy elite minority. Jared Diamond adds, societies face collapse due to deforestation, loss of soil fertility, trade, restrictions, or escalating endemic violence. In some cases, as with the Western Roman Empire, the argument suggests that it didn't collapse but transformed. Around 5,000 to 4,000 years ago, daunting signs of epic droughts were discovered in Africa and Asia. This led to the drying up of the Green Sahara, disrupting monsoon in South and Southeast Asia, causing flooding in East Asia, hampering harvest and development of complex culture. Furthermore, it may have contributed to the decline and fall of Akkadian Empire and Indus Valley civilization. This sudden climate shift is referred to as the 4.2 kiloyear event. The sophisticated Indus Valley civilization established around 3000 BC in present-day northwestern India and Pakistan witnessed its downfall around 1700 BC. The reasons behind its deurbanization remain elusive, given the Indus script has not yet been decoded. Yet there's suggestive evidence toward natural disasters. Signs of a gradual decline appeared from 1900 BC, and by 2 centuries later, most cities were abandoned. Climate change has had a profound influence on the course of human history, according to a group of interdisciplinary researchers led by Joseph McConnell of the Desert Research Institute in Nevada. Using samples collected from glaciers and ice sheets, the team discovered that a volcanic eruption in 43 BA coincided with a period of political upheaval following the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC. It was a time of severe weather, crop failure, and widespread famine, and disease data from tree ring and cave stalagmite analysis supported these findings. The eruption's impact was global. While the northern hemisphere endured drier conditions, the southern hemisphere experienced an increase in rainfall. Appian, the Greek historian, noted that this notable shift in weather contributed to Egypt's failure to maintain its sovereignty against the burgeoning Roman Empire. The researchers proposed that while it's uncertain whether Egypt would have fallen to Roman rule without the eruption of the Okmok volcano in modern-day Alaska, the fallout from the eruption likely expedited the process. Remarkably, these findings align with recent studies investigating the influence of climate change on the rise and fall of civilizations in Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and the Americas. These studies suggest that periods of significant climate change often coincide with times of social upheaval. In particular, data from researchers in mainland China and Hong Kong have drawn a direct correlation between climate change and a rise in large-scale human crises during pre-industrial eras. A case in point is the Mongol conquests, which coincided with the transition from the medieval warm period to the Little Ice Age in the Northern Hemisphere. The result was not the direct cause of the Black Plagues in Europe, but it did generate economic hardship, war, mass migration, and famine that helped spread disease. Equally significant is the 17th century general crisis in Europe that saw extreme intergroup violence and high mortality rates due to the cooling climate of the Little Ice Age. A decrease in sunspot activity during the Maunder minimum period is thought to have caused these adverse conditions, which extended to an increase in incidents of social instability and armed conflict. An example is the 30 Years' War, a conflict rooted in religious discord and the struggle for the Bohemian throne that culminated in a devastating loss of life, with some areas losing up to 70% of their population. In summary, the study underscores the connection between climate change and socio-economic instabilities throughout history, indicating that changes to the climate often serve as a catalyst for crises in human societies. From around 4000 to 3000 BC, a significant decrease in the Neolithic populations of Western Eurasia occurred, largely attributed to the devastating effects of the plague and other similar diseases. This era of decline paved the way for the Indo-European migrations. Circa 3000 BC, the pastoral people of the Yamnaya culture, born from the Pontic, Caspian steppes and carrying high levels of Osh ancestry, initiated a large-scale expansion across Eurasia. This is suggested to largely correlate with the spread of Indo-European languages, a theory upheld by many linguists, archaeologists, and geneticists of modern times. This infiltration by wishes resulted in the near extinction of the iDNA of early European farmers from the gene pool of Europe, drastically altering both the cultural and genetic landscape of the continent. However, the persistence of eFMTDNA hints towards intermingling between Wush males and females. Around the late Bronze Age in the Eastern Mediterranean, a mystery group of tough sea raiders referred to as the Sea Peoples are identified as main factors contributing to the collapse of the age, likely themselves victims of environmental shifts causing widespread famine and heralding the collapse. They rose to prominence. The once mighty Hittite Empire began to crumble post the Battle of Kadesh against the Egyptians in 1285 BC, fueled by internal power struggles, failures in crop yields, and famine assistance through food supplies from their Egyptian allies, despite a peace treaty, proved inadequate. Around 1200 BCE, the Sea Peoples took over a port on Asia Minor's western coastline, effectively severing the Hittites from their grain trade routes. A mortal blow, the destruction of Hattusa, the Hittite capital, ensued. Some Hittite territories managed to survive this onslaught, only to be taken over by Assyrians in the 7th century BC. The Minoan civilization, located on Crete and largely revolving around religious rituals and marine trade, was assimilated into Mycenaean Greece around 1450 BC. However, its own downturn came around 1200 BC, owing to various military confrontations, including the Dorian invasion from the north and attacks from the Sea Peoples. By the 3rd century BEE, the Xiongnu, a nomadic Eurasian people, started to challenge China's borders, but were expelled by the 1st century BCE. The Xiongnu shifted their focus west and displaced several tribes across Eastern and Central Europe, triggering a domino effect of events. Attila the Hun's rise to power and his aggressive campaign of invasion and plunder reached significantly far into Gaul, modern-day France. Attila's Huns came into direct conflict with the Roman Empire, which had been already divided into East and West for ease of governance. During the 11th century AD, North Africa saw a vibrant and populous civilization succumb to ruin after it had expended its resources on internal conflicts and been ravaged by invasions from the Bedouin tribes of Banu Sulaym and Banu Hilal. The lands once brimming with life rendered desolate by merciless invaders towards the beginning of the 13th century. The seemingly invincible Genghis Khan, a warlord from the Mongol tribe, initiated a fearsome territorial expansion. Utilizing their superior cavalry, the Mongols conquered the lands of China, Russia, the Middle East, and Islamic Central Asia, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The invasions brought societal shifts, turning settled societies into nomadic ones, and highlighted by events such as China's population being decimated by half due to war, famine, and disease. The Mongol invasions also instigated significant political changes, leading to the decline of the Khmer Empire and the rise of the Thais and Vietnamese. When the later Lý dynasty of Vietnam declined in the late 1700s, a lethal power struggle ensued, culminating with the emergence of Emperor Gia Long of the Nguyen dynasty. Vietnam's shift towards a policy of extreme cultural assimilation bred resentment, which eventually manifested in an uprising. Around 1210 BC, the new Kingdom of Egypt was exporting massive quantities of grain to the crumbling Hittite Empire. This initially staved off famine in Anatolia, but things quickly deteriorated. Despite a monumental victory over the sea, peoples at the Battle of Exwa, Egypt itself descended into an epoch of decline. Globally connected societies in the Eastern Mediterranean fell into disarray, disrupting trade routes and plunging the region into economic depression. Governmental infighting and inadequate remuneration of workers resulted in the first recorded labor strike in history. Unpredictable flooding patterns of the Nile led to failed harvests and subsequently a debilitating famine. Swelling food prices and external threats from Libyans and Nubians compounded the crisis. During the 1300s, Britain experienced a period of severe food shortages due to excessive rainfall and flooding, which resulted in widespread crop failure and livestock death. The subsequent surge in food prices compelled King Edward II to impose price controls. However, this was futile as merchants refused to sell at such low prices, and the act was annulled in 1316 by the Lincoln Parliament. The socio-economic effect was drastic, and both nobility and commoners found themselves impacted, resorting to begging, theft, and unconventional sources of food, while Northern England faced additional challenges from Scottish raiders. Matters were no different on the continent. The Great Famine of 1317 occurred at the transition between the Medieval Warm Period and Little Ice Age, thought to be brought about by the 1314 eruption of Mount Tarawera in New Zealand. This famine was just the first of many hardships to strike Europe in the century, including the 100 Years' War and the Black Death. As agriculture emerged and societies transitioned from nomadic to sedentary life, the incidence of contagious diseases increased. With these societies' close proximity to livestock, contaminated water, and garbage, coupled with poor sanitation and lack of medical knowledge, disease spread swiftly and lethally. The Antonine Plague, 165-180 AD, is a prominent historical example of this, with symptoms suggestive of smallpox or measles described by the Greek physician Galen. This highly infectious disease, originating from China, rapidly spread across the Roman Empire through the Silk Road. The epidemic reached catastrophic proportions, decimating between 1/3 to half of the population, which included many Roman soldiers, businessmen, farmers, and civilians alike because of this. There were shortages in manpower, plunging the empire into economic depression as trade was disrupted and a subsequent food crisis emerged. These circumstances facilitated the Germanic tribes crossing the Rhine, ultimately exposing the vulnerability of the Roman defenses. Indeed, Emperor Justinian the Great had the opportunity to refocus his efforts on reasserting control over territories of the Western Empire, courtesy of a peace treaty with the Persians. His military leaders, Belisarius and Narses, managed to score several significant victories against the Ostrogoths and Vandals. Nevertheless, their hopes of maintaining control over the Western Empire were diminished by the arrival of an event retrospectively referred to as the Justinian Plague, 541-542. As per Byzantine historian Procopius of Caesarea, the origin of this devastating epidemic can be traced back to China and northeastern India, impacting the Eastern Roman Empire via established trade routes that culminated in the Mediterranean. Cutting-edge scholarship attributes the plague to the bacterium Yersinia pestis, infamously known for triggering the Black Death, the most lethal pandemic in human history. The actual death toll remains a topic of debate, with contemporary estimates fluctuating between 30 and 50 million. An undoubtedly significant portion of the global population during that time frame unquestionably. This plague signaled the beginning of the Simultaneously, this epidemic wreaked havoc on the Sasanian Empire located in Persia. Taking advantage of this turbulence, Caliph Abu Bakr prompted military campaigns leading to the takeover of Sasanian and Romanian territories in Caucasus, Egypt, North Africa, and the Levant among others. Before the plague, stability was the defining feature of the Mediterranean region, both commercially and culturally. Post-plague, however, it fractured into three dominant civilizations engaged in a struggle for power: medieval Europe, Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic civilization. The sudden death of several workers, a significant portion consisting of slaves, led to an acute labor shortage. This forced landowners to allot land to serfs in return for military protection and other privileges, laying the groundwork for feudalism. There are suggestions that the Mongol missions may have facilitated the spread of the bubonic plague across Eurasia, ultimately setting off the Black Death in the early 14th century. Italian historian Gabriele de Mussi mentions that during the Kaffa siege, Mongols used the corpses of plague victims as projectiles, which were then transported by soldiers to Mediterranean ports. However, this version of how the Black Death arrived in Europe remains a deep-hated topic of discussion amongst experts, largely due to the complex epidemiology of the plague. Experts of today stress on the notion that the Black Death was not spread from a single source. Investigations into this past event are further complicated by temporal gaps and political issues, coupled with the challenging task of discerning between natural outbreaks and instances of biological warfare, both being recurrent themes in the history of humankind. Former serfs, liberated from feudal constraints, moved to cities and leaned towards artisan and trade professions, with the most successful ones forming the new middle class. Growth in trade echoed the escalating demand for various consumer items, and the society, now affluent, was able to finance the arts and sciences. The interaction between European explorers and Native Americans led to exposure of the latter to diseases of immense severity. Native Americans, originally migrants from northeastern Asia around 15,000 years ago, had not encountered the myriad of contagious diseases that arose owing to the advent of agriculture in the Old World. This meant their immune systems were not prepared to combat these diseases, which their Eurasian counterparts had grown resistant to. Upon European arrival in the Americas, a multitude of diseases like smallpox, measles, whooping cough, and the bubonic plague, to name a few, began decimating the indigenous population. Tropical areas bore the brunt of malaria, yellow fever, dengue fever, river blindness, and more, most of which had ties to Africa. Smallpox in particular crippled Mexico and Peru in the 1520s and 1530s, respectively, significantly assisting the European conquerors, the culmination of Spanish military assaults and the introduction of unfamiliar diseases led to the downfall of the Aztec Empire in the 16th century. It is widely held that the massive decline in Native American population by 90s to 95s was largely due to Old World diseases. New research, however, indicates a significant role of tuberculosis from seals and sea lions. Oceania and Madagascar experienced similar fates. Smallpox, introduced externally, led to an outbreak in Australia in 1789, inflicting massive damage on the Aboriginal population. The extent of this outbreak is a contentious topic, but some believe it wiped out nearly half of the coastal Aboriginal population on the East Coast. The origins of the disease's entry into the continent is a topic of ongoing historical debate. Smallpox remained a lethal disease, claiming an estimated 300 million lives in the 20th century alone, despite the availability of a vaccine since 1796. As human migration increased globally, societies thrived on trade and urbanization, leading to more susceptible, dense populations plagued by infectious diseases. Despite frequent outbreaks, medical advancements succeeded in mitigating their effect. The 20th century saw a tremendous increase in human and farm, animal populations, potentially introducing more sources of disease. However, due to medical progress, both developed and developing societies exhibit lesser susceptibility to infectious diseases than ever before. In the historical accounting of the histories, Greek scholar Polybius primarily attributed the downfall of the Hellenistic civilization to very low fertility rates. His opinion was that people prioritized wealth, leisure, and the finer things in life over family responsibilities and child-rearing. Those who did bear children, in Polybius' view, did so to provide for their wealth or cater to their luxurious lifestyle. Around 100 BCE, the concept of romantic love began taking root in Rome. Towards the ends of the Roman Republic, Roman women were notorious for divorce and extramarital affairs and demonstrated a certain hesitation towards childbirth. Observing this shift as a threat to social order and politics and viewing the Roman aristocracy as too globalized and individualistic, Caesar Augustus, once the Roman Empire was established, promulgated laws aiming to boost the birth rate. Men and women within certain age brackets were practically forced to marry, with individuals who were widowed or divorced obligated to remarry. Granting exceptions to those having birthed several children, preference was granted to those having multiple legitimate offspring regarding political or bureaucratic opportunities. Inheritance rights decreased for those who neglected to have children. Augustus's speech to Roman nobility emphasized his grave concern over the reduced birth rates amongst Roman high society. He mentioned that to boost Rome's influence and wealth, freed slaves had been granted citizenship and allies provided governmental roles. However, the primary lines of Roman inhabitants were dwindling and shifting this burden onto foreigners. Population imbalances could occur when low fertility rates were compounded by high dependency ratios or skewed wealth distribution. Both hallmarks of the Roman Empire, primary factors of societal collapse, often dovetailed with population dynamics. Take, for example, the distinctive gender ratio of Cusco, Peru, at the time of the Spanish conquest. It's evident that human societies also display population cycles. Societies as diverse as those of England, France, Egypt, and China over many eras and ruling periods displayed similar trends, with periods of peace and prosperity, coupled with population growth followed by spikes in political turbulence and violence. During periods of decline, instability was the norm, as opposed to times of population growth. Pre-industrial agrarian societies usually faced instability after a century or two of stability. However, having the population reach its maximum sustainable level would not necessarily result in a decline, as long as unity and strong leadership were present. Historical theories have progressed greatly, transitioning from social and ethical focuses through ideological and ethnocentric considerations to a more comprehensive, multidisciplinary approach. Renowned anthropologist Joseph Tainter proposed that societal collapses stem from these societies exhausting their developmental prospects and inability to adapt to diminishing natural returns of their survival techniques. Furthermore, philosopher Oswald Spengler suggested that civilization in its declining or winter phase will observe a reduced enthusiasm for abstract thinking. Psychologists David Rand and Jonathan Cohen developed a theory revolving around the human cognitive process. They posit that human beings oscillate between two general cognitive modes. One is quick, automatic, but rigid, while the other is slower, more analytical, yet more adjustable. They argue that this cognitive dichotomy explains why individuals persist with harmful practices despite logical reasoning highlighting the imminent perils. Our cognition switches from the second to the first mode with the advent of revolutionary inventions that significantly enhanced living standards that illustrated this theory, with recent occurrences like antibiotic overuse leading to resistant bacterial strains and inadequate retirement savings plans. Tainter also emphasized the irrational tendencies of human decision-making process, according to behavioral economics. He brought attention to the incremental difficulty in finding technological solutions to societal collapses as innovation rates decline. Tainer further expressed that the excess economic productivity paving the path to modern settled lifestyles, unlike that of nomadic hunter-gatherers, could also be an indicator of hidden societal vulnerabilities owing to dependence on this productivity. Deteriorating environmental returns masked by growing populace and sophisticated technology pose threats to societal complexity if development surpasses sustainability, leading to chaotic reorganization. The Malthusian scissors model, suggesting relentless population growth against limited resources, indicates the cross-cutting environmental forces. A holistic societal collapse, seen as the utter breakdown of economic, cultural, and social institutions along with ecological relationships, is a common characteristic. In his book, Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed, Jared Diamond introduces 5 interconnected collapse triggers: unsustainable resource exploitation, climate changes, dwindling support from friendly societies, antagonistic neighbors, and unfitting attitudes towards change. These may compound to expedite societal failures. Hall concluded that to maintain the energy overhead for a modern society, a minimum energy return on investment (ROI) of 3:1 is requisite. Over time, the ROI of the most relied upon resource, petroleum, has declined significantly from 101 to around 10:1, underlining the reality of diminishing natural resources. This ROI is vital to sustaining crucial societal institutions, including the government, legal and financial entities, transportation infrastructures, manufacturing, construction and maintenance of infrastructure, and the standards of living of all societal members. The issue of alternative energy sources such as solar power was explored by social scientist Luke Kemp, concluding that these alternatives present a low ROI due to their lower energy density, significant land requirements, and the extensive use of rare earth metals for production. Hall and his team concurred with this assessment, stating that although renewable energy sources offer pollution-free energy, their low ROI might make them inadequate substitutes for fossil fuels, which continue to be humanity's primary energy source. Mathematician Safa Motashare and his team showed that non-renewable resources like fossil fuels have permitted a 10-fold population growth compared to renewable resources alone, thereby delaying societal collapse. However, when such a collapse occurs, it would be drastic. The ROI decline, according to Homer Dixon, has been one of the causes of societal collapses in the past, as corroborated by historian Joseph Tainer, citing the fall of the Roman and Maya empires as instances. Tainer offers 3 models of societal collapse: the dinosaur, societies depleting resources exponentially without attempts to fix the problem due to the rigidness of their ruling elites; the runaway train, societies whose continuance depends on perpetual growth, eventually unsustainable due to exhaustion of acquisition avenues; and the house of cards, societies inherently unstable due to their vastness and complexity, especially observed in government-run organizations in communist nations. Tainer posits that social complexity is a relatively novel and atypical phenomenon, necessitating persistent sustenance. 4 key principles Tainer posits elucidate the concept of societal collapse, stating that it signifies an energy deficit leading to the abrupt loss of social complexity, stratification, internal and external exchanges, and productivity. In contrast, British historian Arnold J. Toynbee's 12-volume work, A Study of History, emphasizes internal socio-political dynamics as central to the rise and fall of 28 civilizations. Toynbee proposes that civilizations develop through a series of key phases: Genesis, growth; time of troubles; universal state; and disintegration, a creative minority. Catapults a civilization to birth by meeting the challenges presented by its physical, social, and political landscape. Nonetheless, the inability to adapt with time often leads this creative minority to become a stubborn dominant minority, subsequently causing the society to falter. Oppositely, the German thinker Oswald Spengler reflects on the transformation from culture to civilization in his book, The Decline of the West. Toynbee further asserts that the eventual stifling of political creativity under a universal state signals the collapse of a civilization. Thus, the dominant minority tries to unjustly and forcefully maintain their privileged position, provoking an antagonistic response from the proletariat. Fundamentally, as per Toynbee, the bitter disenchantment of an internal proletariat subjugated by the dominant minority and the envy of an impoverished external proletariat outside civilization mark the decay of civilizations. He sees the downfall characterized by a societal schism in which abandon and self-control replace creativity. Carroll Quigley, a historian, elaborated on the idea of societal collapse in his work, The Evolution of Civilizations, suggesting that social tools intended to address societal needs gradually morph into entities that prioritize personal gain over societal welfare. Critique arose in the 1950s against Arnold Toynbee's historical approach and his civilizational analysis, particularly for its excessive focus on the divine, causing his academic standing to suffer. Toynbee's work, however, remained well received outside educational institutions for a period. Interest in this approach resurged with Samuel P. Huntington's The Clash of Civilizations, asserting human history as primarily civilizational history and suggesting that the post-Cold War world would consist of multiple major competing civilizations. The development of a holistic understanding of societal collapse, considering the complexity of human societies, remains an unexplored issue. Current explorations struggle to decipher the internal organizational patterns in extensive, distributed systems like human societies. In most cases, a holistic societal collapse seems to be the only reasonable explanation indicating the existence of these structural patterns. However, without concrete identification, efforts at scientific exploration seem to be restricted to creating narrative stories about systemic organization and transformation. Peter Turchin, an evolutionary anthropologist and quantitative historian in the 1990s, discovered that population models for predators and prey could also explain the development of human societies. He studied the relationship between social factors such as income disparities and political instability, and observed recurring cycles of unrest in historic societies like ancient Egypt, China, and Russia. He identified two such cycles, a longer secular cycle lasting 2 to 3 centuries, and a shorter cycle. He observed that societies typically start with relative equality. As population increases and labor costs decrease, a wealthy upper class is formed, worsening the conditions for the working class. Increasing inequality leads to instability, with the lower class suffering and the upper class involved in struggles for power. The resulting social turbulence ultimately triggers a societal downfall. A downfall becomes irreversible when a society experiences simultaneous internal and external crises that mutually reinforce, leading to a total collapse. This pattern is traceable throughout history. For instance, ancient Egypt succumbed to its demise due to invasions from various forces such as the Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persian rule, Greeks, Ptolemaic dynasty, and the Roman Empire. Similarly, the Eastern Roman Empire, often referred to as medieval Greek, fell prey to both its western and eastern neighbors, eventually being overtaken by the Ottoman Empire. Several Asian dynasties met a similar fate. The Khitan Western Liao dynasty, Jurchen Jin dynasty, Tangut Xia dynasty, Nanzhao Song dynasty, Khwarezmian Empire, Abbasid Caliphate, Ayyubids, Nizari Ismaili state, Sultanate of Rum, Kievan Rus, Volga Bulgaria, and Cumans all crumbled under the overpowering force of the Mongol Empire. In Europe, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth did not escape this destructive cycle, falling victim to the aggressive expansion of the Kingdom of Prussia, Russian Empire, and Archduchy of Austria. Even great cities were lost due to this dynamic of downfall. The ancient city of Cahokia in North America is a classic example, voluntarily abandoned by its inhabitants.